In today's episode, we are going to dive into a practical expression of what church can be. A lot of times I get in conversations with people and they're like, yeah, we're critiquing things the right way. We're pointing out things that have issues. But then what? What are we left with? And a lot of times that can be really hard when you're emerging out of something into something new. How do you know what the something new is going to look like? And today I think is a great example of someone who's doing a really good job stumbling their way into something new as he describes it. Today we're going to talk with Mark McKinney. Mark has been married 25 years to his wife, Michelle. They have 4 kids, all internationally adopted from Taiwan, Vietnam, Dominican Republic, 2 of them with special medical needs. Mark says he probably has a problem. For some reason, he has 4 different kinds of grills and smokers from Weber, but he loves cooking for his friends and his family. He has Midwest roots with a West Coast heart, which I think is great. He grew up in Indiana, moved to California 20 years ago, and has been on the West Coast ever since. He planted a trauma-informed church called Reunion that is located in a brewery, and that is what we're going to talk a lot about in this episode. He believes in the church, but also believes it needs to look different in the 21st century. And they are doing it. They are out there trying something new. And if you resonate with this podcast, you are probably going to love hearing Mark's story. This is episode 37, Church in the Brewery.
I've never shared this with anybody publicly. There's so many things happening in this conversation right now. 1,000 years from now, people are going to be looking at this podcast saying, so this was the breakthrough.
If this was SportsCenter, that would be like such a hot take. Skip Bayless would have no idea. Stephen A. Smith would have no idea what to say if you drop that down. That is so good.
The joke I always say is like, how'd you learn so much? You got to drink a lot.
The power of food and beverage to lubricate an environment.
Resistance to change is hurting the church.
I'm not in the camp that God has a penis or a vagina or a body at all. I'm in the camp that God is a universal spirit.
This is the strangest podcast that I've been on. I don't even know what to do.
I'm kind of geeked up about this wine.
So this is my second glass, and it delivers a little more of a punch than I expected. So if I get a little loopy, it's your fault. You told me to drink on the show.
I will also say as a confession, I am a lightweight. So I've had like 3 sips of this wine and I'm already feeling it. So this is fun.
You've uncovered the mystery. You've exposed the formula.
You've just duct taped together a number of things that aren't normally hanging out together, and I'm here for it.
We're going to sit down at table, we're going to have a glass of wine and some food, and we're going to talk about the beauty of Jesus.
Thank you for the hospitality that this particular podcast provides folks like myself, and I know others, to be curious around their faith practices.
I really appreciate this venue, what you're doing. It is fun, and yet you dig into the deep stuff.
I will never forget the first time I bought a bottle of wine by myself, which was yesterday.
If you're familiar with drunk history, I thought it's like drunk theology. So I
got a little spicy there. It's the peach wine. I keep going on these tangents because of this peach wine.
By the way, drinking this Pinot Grigio at 3 o'clock in the afternoon is making me even more direct in my communication than I normally would be.
Welcome to the podcast, Mark.
Hey, how's it going, Jeremy? Good to see you.
It is great to be with you again. This is our second take on this episode. I botched the first one with some technical issues, and Mark is gracious enough to give me round 2. And I was just telling him before we recorded that this was such a meaningful conversation the first time we did it that I just didn't want to skip over it. So I'm incredibly grateful he's doing this again. He's doing me a solid today, and you, dear listener or watcher, are going to be the beneficiary of that because this was a great conversation. So I'm excited to get into it again. Today, in Mark's honor, he lives in California, so I went a California bottle.
Okay.
This is actually one of my favorite go-to, easy to find bottles. It's 2022 Cloudbreak Black Cloud. So you can find this, I think, in a lot of grocery stores actually sell this bottle. I don't think it's super expensive either. This is a red blend that is just really easy to drink, but doesn't feel overly processed. It's got a smooth mouthfeel to it. It is dark. I mean, you see this in the glass and you think, oh, this thing's going to knock me down. And it doesn't. It just has that vibe to it. I'm getting cranberry, black cherry, mushroom, super easy drinking, very well balanced. I'm really enjoying this one. Mark, tell us about what you're drinking today.
Yeah, I got this 2 Juggernaut. I feel like they're trying to overcompensate for something because of the picture on the front of it. But
that is an aggressive wine.
But I like it. It's a Cabernet, and it's got a dryness to it that normally I don't like, but I for whatever reason like it. It's got like this black cherry stuff going on in the background as well, and I kind of like that darker, bolder type fruit. I guess fruit forward. My wife is really the one that has a better palate than I do, but I'm drinking this in honor of my buddy Vince, who is a wine connoisseur, and he turned me onto this. So
nice.
Cheers to Vince.
So this is a regular go-to for you then. This is not your first time trying it.
No, this is not my first time. Yeah, it's in the rotation. I wouldn't say on the regular. I'm more of a Paso region guy, but on the first podcast go around, I had my favorite from Austin Hope, but we digress. I'm not going to go there.
That's fair. You know what? I deserve that, Mark. I deserve that.
And I don't quite have the awesome background that I did previously with all the wine barrels at the winery where our church meets, but here we are. So
you were in front of wine barrels last time, but we'll take the Southern California vibes you're bringing today.
Yes, sir.
I like it.
Yes, sir.
All right, Mark, as we get into a little bit of your story, I find it so intriguing. And since you and I have been talking more, I find myself thinking about what you're doing more and more, and even envisioning how much of other people can do this. And this is why I'm excited to get into some of these details with you. But for people trying to get a little bit of a feel of your story, your journey, how would you say that your faith has changed in the last 10 years?
You know, I think this is part of my story that God did and is doing inside of me, where I always kind of I'm the youngest of my family. I'm the baby. And I kind of always grew up with that feeling of like my brother and sister saying, oh, well, of course Mark got that, you know, he's the baby, stuff. And that kind of followed me into ministry. And probably like the first 20 years of my ministry, literally I just kind of had friends, and I would never say this out loud, and I'm only saying it out loud now because I had to go through the trenches to get here. But, some of my friends would call me the golden boy, and like really a lot of the things in ministry that I did just seemed to like go the right way. And so long story short, I had this cool, awesome idea that I felt like God was telling me to plant a church, which I'm not really sure that was from the Lord anymore, but
could have been the wine, huh?
It could have been the wine for sure. But I planted a church, and really, I mean, we went through initial really, really hard season. Then we had COVID, and just all kinds of crazy stuff happened to where my plan was certainly like within the first 6 months, the wheels had fallen off. And I was basically in my basement crying, saying, God, I what do you want me to do? Like my plans had been like nuked beyond belief. I quit my job, no source of income, moved and bought a house, moved my family over from Vegas to here. And literally I was like, had nothing to like go for it. My partnership that I had moved here to start a church with had gone up in smoke. And I mean, imagine bad things happening in the church. But literally, it was like all I had to hold on to was God. All I had was like literally I had to hang on to him. And before that, my faith, here's how it has changed, is I think I would have secretly said, yeah, this is kind of my thing and God's along for the ride. Of course, it's going to go good. Of course, I mean, everything that I've done has gone, again, overstating it some, but to where now I feel like there's this sense of like, I'm hanging on to him. I don't know how it's going to go, but I'm just trusting in him more than my own quote unquote gifts, abilities, my ability to charm my way into or out of a situation. And literally, I think there's a reason why I had to go through that, and I think it's really just to kind of point to him, saying it's him doing whatever it is that he's doing here. It's nothing. It's not because I'm smart. It's not because I'm awesome. It's literally because of him. And so my faith has changed in the sense of just being more humble, being more reliant upon him, and realizing that it's him who is going to do anything and not me. Even though, of course, he can use us. Does that make sense?
Totally. No, I love that. And we all want success, right? We want everything we do to go well, and that's where you start drawing some bad conclusions, and you start thinking things that and then you set yourself up for some scary places in life. But it's when you describe the season you went through, and you kind of get a new kind of clarity, and that's certainly been my story as well. I know for many people can relate with things not working out the way we envision, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, I see God in this in different ways. And I love that. And I think it has produced some really beautiful things in your story and in your ministry and how this is playing out today. So one of the things that I love about what you guys are doing, and this is where I think you and I initially were, drawn together. The typical church plant's like, all right, you go find an elementary school, a junior high, maybe like a performing arts center, something like that. And you rent it out on the weekends, and then people come and you already have the space. And the goal being, get out of there as fast as you can, get your own building, and, be big. And it's almost like the playbook. Like, we don't even challenge it anymore. It's like, yeah, that's the way you grow it. You decided to go a different route. And again, since I've learned about how you guys are doing this, I just can't stop thinking about this model because it's so intriguing. You do church in a brewery. Not an elementary school, not a junior high, not a high school, in a brewery in the community. Tell us a little bit about that journey. How do you go from being what you and I would both consider a traditional pastor, right, in the more traditional model, to now you're the guy doing church out of a brewery?
Well, initially I didn't write home about it because I grew up in the Midwest, and so it was certainly taboo.
You got to be a little hush-hush about it.
I mean, honestly, I don't know. It wasn't me who picked it, and we stumbled into it, is how I tell the story. We stumbled into this, and all of a sudden we have realized that God has given us favor and like people of peace, and COVID kind of helped choose it for us in some weird way, because we did start out the playbook of the 20th century playbook of church planning. We were in a movie theater. We did the setup and tear down. We had $250,000 worth of equipment and trailer and all the stuff you do. And I hated it. Quite honestly, I hated the theater. It wasn't our vibe, but it was the only viable option in our area. And then COVID happened. And then in California, I mean, literally 18 months of mandated no meeting. And at the end of COVID, we had done these awkward park gatherings, and, it was what you did to try and get your people together in a safe way and all that kind of jazz. One of our members came to us and said, hey, I don't know if you want to or not, but we have a winery production room that we don't use on Sundays. Would you want to use that? And at first it was in a different city, about 15 minutes away from where we initially launched. It was totally different setting, all that kind of stuff. And so I had the thought of like, well, it's at bare minimum a place where we can gather a couple of times. And so I said, sure, let's try it. And man, day one, when we met there, and we did super stripped down. I mean, we had unloaded a lot of our gear, and we had come out of COVID. From day one, it was like our place, and we had stripped down all of our gear to where it was just really simple. And because there was a brewery there, there's a coffee shop and a pizzeria there, and then the winery, it just was like magic. I don't know how else to say it. For me, it was like the vibe we were going for. We just didn't know where it was yet. And literally we dismissed our church, and I said, hey, go grab a drink from one of these places, coffee, wine, beer, grab a pizza, and continue the conversation. And man, our people were like, okay, yeah. And it's been that way ever since. And it's just been incredible. And the quick version of how we got over into the brewery was the brewmaster, the owner of the brewery, who's right next door to the winery, came to me after 3 or 4 weeks, started coming to the church. And he was like, hey, if you ever want to use the brewery for anything, it's yours, you know? So that's where we put our elementary kids at first, in the brewery warehouse. And so literally stacks of kegs surrounding the kids, big beer vats, whatever you call them, in the background. And we, at the time, were meeting in the winery production room as adults. And then I talked to the brewmaster, kind of the same time frame. And I was like, hey, who else should I talk to around in this area? And he was like, oh, you should go talk to Sue. She's opening up a gymnastics place right across the street. And I'm talking like stone's throw. So I go across the street and I go in, and there's this lady sitting behind the desk. It hadn't opened yet or whatever. And I'm like, hey, I'm looking for Sue. And she's like, I'm Sue. And I said, hey, I'm Mark, the pastor who has this church meeting in the brewery, you know? And she just got this big smile. She's like, I've been stalking you guys, watching you guys from a distance. And I just simply said, well, I'm looking for a partnership and just trying to build relationships here in the community. And I don't even know what that means. And she said, I'm telling you, like, first sentence out of her mouth was, well, you can use the gymnastics or the gym however you want to on Sunday mornings. And so that's where we put our birth through 5 or so. And so that's where we have our kids meeting. And it's kind of changed and morphed a little bit, because now we're in the adults are in the brewery event space. Our elementary are down in the wine tasting room, and our baby and littles are still over at the gym. But we have a beautiful partnership. We just had our church Christmas party in the brewery event space, and Sue at Action Academy, she opens up the gym for any of our events, and we get to dump our 40 to 60 kids over there and have a blast in the gymnastics gym. So that's a longer version probably than the short version, but that's how we got here in this space.
So I can imagine some people listening to this right now are trying to wrap their head around some of the things you just said. Like, wait, you're doing a church, how and where and you know what? So when a family comes, I just love my imagination of this, and they're like, all right, hey, we heard about you guys, we want to check it out. And we have this, you know, son, daughter, and you're like, yeah, take him over here to the wine tasting room.
Right.
I mean, is that weird for people? Is it cool? Is it like I'm a little uncomfortable? Like my kids are in a very non-traditional, you know, environment here. What has that been like?
Well, you know, you're walking up to this space. It's not like, I mean, you have to mentally think, and I know if you've grown up in church or been around church for a while, you have your idea of what it means to walk up to church. You're in a big parking lot, you're walking towards a big building that's painted real nice, probably has good signage, and kids' environments are already, you know, like all that stuff. Here, you're literally parking and you're walking down the alley, that's what this area is called, is the alley of a brewery and a winery and a coffee shop and a pizza joint. And so I think it already kind of takes people's guard down a little bit. And I think you kind of are forced to reconcile already, like, okay, this is going to be different. This is going to be not your norm. And we don't do like normal kids check-in. We ditch that because we want to make it easy for people who show up on the alley and, hey, just drop your kid off. Hey, bring your kid on in. But you know, like if you're in church land, it's like, well, you know, let's get a retinal scan and you know, get your background. I mean, like we still do background checks for our volunteers, but it's just less formal. And I think people are disarmed by that. There have been a few people who I think have said, I don't know if that's for me. And quite honestly, they don't stay because we are a church and a brewery and their kid is learning about Jesus next to a wine barrel. I think it's biblical, but it's just different. And so it creates a different kind of demographic, quite honestly, which are mostly, it's a lot of de-churched people. And I would say there are a quarter of our people are churched, and then there's unchurched people who are coming who they were coming to get a beer or a glass of wine or a coffee and wait a minute, church meets here, Yeah, so it's pretty unique. But yeah, it kind of weeds out churchy people. And I mean that in the most positive sense. I really do. I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but it just, if you like it, you're gonna say. If you don't, it's definitely in your face. I mean, the smell sometimes is like, oh man, they're definitely brewing something up in here, so.
Yeah, I don't imagine that would be like a lot of people on the fence there. I think that you would pretty quickly realize, hey, I'm really into this and this is really cool, or like this is not at all what we're looking for.
Yeah. I mean, two quick stories. There's a guy who his weekly thing, probably early 30s, that had 2 kids. Their weekly thing was to grab breakfast burritos, come over to the alley and get coffee. And stuff was kind of hitting the fan in their world, and they were kind of like, well, we probably should do something with our, get our act together. Well, we've been here in this church meeting down the alleyway. Maybe we should check that out. And they literally just started coming. And he literally said to me, this is going on a couple of months ago, but he said, dude, if you would have told me 6 months ago I love going to church, I would have laughed in your face. And so there's one quick story. Another group of people that we are finding is our niche. It's more of a boomer generation where there are wives who have been going to church forever, and their husbands are like, I'll see you after church, but they don't go. But literally, just this last weekend, a guy named Robert, he's like, I've tried some of her churches, and I just never can get past certain things, blah, blah, blah. He's like, but this is my place. I love coming to my church, and this is my place. And his wife's sitting right there. I don't know if she would choose necessarily to continue to keep coming to reunion always, but because her husband fits and feels like he's there, she's all about it. So
I love that.
Yeah.
What do you think you've learned in doing church in a non-traditional space for church?
Oh man, a lot. It's fun. First of all, there's there's so many different pendulum swings. Like, it's really fun, but man, it's hard. Like, we don't have our own space. We share it. And so as much as I love the idea of having our own space, well, we don't have the bills and the upkeep and all that stuff, is a bonus. But I would say I've enjoyed this season of ministry more than I have in the past. I can't even count. It just is so fresh for me. And so my learnings are, you have to be flexible. I mean, it dictates that you're flexible, literally. I've learned the value of like our church being in the middle of the marketplace. I mean, like, it's really incredible just to see what it does to have like this faith component that's like a part of the conversation when we're planning for Oktoberfest. Like, I mean, I'm sitting around this table, I'm invited. Our church is invited to participate in Oktoberfest and Frühlingsfest. And so like, you have to switch your mentality, I guess, maybe, as the learning. And the more traditional would be like, well, we're going to pass out flyers and we're going to, do, I don't know, something churchy. Instead, it's more about serving. I think we have to learn how to serve and be for the people who we are there with and the businesses. And I think that's one of the learnings right now that I'm trying to maybe sharpen or dive deeper into, of what does it mean to really serve the businesses that we have been partnering with or rubbing shoulders with, as opposed to trying to get our name out there. Because again, that's kind of part of church planning, is like, well, at the end of the day, you still need people, or you want people to grow and all that kind of stuff. But I really have come to this understanding and belief that if we're serving the people, the businesses, the owners of this alley, I think it's just God's going to get the increase and give the increase to whatever it is that he might want to do in and through us. And so that's kind of a meandering answer. I think the biggest learning is really just, we have to be flexible and we have to serve and be there to serve those without an ulterior motive to get something back. Does that make sense? Because we can serve hoping you're going to scratch my back, type of a thing. So
I actually love almost the default posture this puts you in, because I think, and being on numerous church staffs over the years, you know, all churches, I think, want to be part of the community. They want to be flexible. You know, they want to, they always say, yeah, we want to do these things.
Yeah.
But when you own everything, and especially the nicer your campus is, there's very much a sense of, we have our own place in this. Come to us. You know, we have our chips, and you know, you kind of you view everything from that point of view. Whereas your starting point is different, where it's not your space to claim and just own it however you want. You automatically are in this kind of like mutual flourishing relationship with the businesses, right? Like where it's like you can't just say, yeah, we're gonna have it this week and we need it all week, and you know, tough luck. It's like, no, you can't say that. So then you have to work with them, which then puts you, it would seem like it by default puts you into a much more humble, is the word you use, which is great, humble posture toward the actual people in the community, which I gotta think would be easier to produce healthy relationships rather than, hey, come to our event, come to our thing, come do this on our terms. And so do you think there's something there like that just in the very nature of this, it like lends itself, I guess, to being a better relational build with the community?
I mean, yeah, 100%. Because, like you said, it almost forces you or puts you automatically in the seat of, we're along for the ride. We're not the one driving. And I'll give you what I feel like is a great example. Again, we've been in this environment now coming up on 3 years, 4 years, 3.5 years, and we've participated in multiple, I know more about German beer festivals than I ever thought I would, but we're always invited. They're always, and they do like this little farmer's market, and, you know, all kinds of vendors show up to these festivals and all that kind of stuff. And they've always said, hey, you have a table here. We want you to be a part of this. And so the very first one, we did whatever it is that you might imagine church planners would do at some kind of festival like this. We had our tent, we had our sign, we had our pamphlets, we had our labeled water bottles, and dude, these people were showing up to drink beer. They weren't showing up to talk to us about our church. So that was year one. Year two was, okay, let's change it up a little bit. Let's do like a little bit of a bake sale for a good cause, for something in the community. And oh yeah, by the way, we have a few church things, church item pamphlets or whatever, invite cards. Again, both of those just felt forced, felt like you're just trying too hard. And it's learnings for us. We're just kind of like, I guess we should do this or this. And now the third year, we no longer put a table out, but they use all of our sound equipment for their bands, because they play music nonstop for 2 days straight. They use our lighting. We provide the sound people for it. We ourselves are bussing tables with all the beer steins and stuff. And we also are just showing up. I mean, it's kind of like their Christmas and Easter. We show up and we try their Oktoberfest beer, and we stand around there's a brewmaster community from a lot of the area breweries that show up to these things. And so I get to rub shoulders with some of these other breweries, and the guys who are also in the warehouse making the beer, I get to pat them on the back and say, hey, this tastes great, or, you know, what a great opportunity. And, you know, you're just there to serve them. And that's kind of the evolution of, like, original mindset was, how do we promote ourselves? How can we get our name out there? To now it's more about, how can we just be a part of this community and serve it? And again, we had to stumble and stub our toes and get the doors, you know, like, I mean, there was a lot of that to get to this point where I really truly believe us being in the marketplace, us being in this position where we don't own the building, there has been a unique dynamic that it has forced us, and we're still trying to figure it out. I mean, we're still trying to learn, how do we be a part of this community and serve it? But it really does force us into a unique position of, hey, whatever we can do to support you.
Right.
As opposed to, we're putting on this event, we're getting the bounce houses and the this and the that and all that kind of stuff. You come to us, we actually are in with them. And it's so, I mean, dude, it's just so, I get excited about it. I mean, it's just really, really something so powerful for me. So.
No, and this is where, again, this is like when I started learning about your model, it just intrigued me of, what if more people did this? You know, what if this got added as an option in the modern playbook, you know, where it's like, doesn't have to do it that way. You could try this way. And this way has a lot of pros, it seems like to me, of these things, of the way it allows you to connect with your community. So here's a question then, to someone who's listening going, all right, should we entertain this? You know, should more people do this? Do you think more church communities should try meeting in these kind of spaces?
I mean, the easy answer, the short answer is yes, because I believe it's a huge opportunity. I mean, even from just a pure brewery standpoint, you know, craft brewing industry, I mean, it's so big. I mean, it's just, there's a brewery everywhere, and it's usually locally owned, and they generally have some kind of place for a musician to play while people are having a good time, all that kind of stuff. And so there are obstacles for sure. Where do you put your kids? Where do you, how do you go about it? But I personally believe it's a huge opportunity. That being said, I think you also have to have the right person or the right group of people doing it. Yeah. I think coming into it, because I'm protective now of my community. I'm protective of the brewery and the winery and the pizza and the craft house, because I don't want people coming in placing their quote unquote church model burdens on, these people. So I want it to be the right people. I would want it to be the right people who are flexible, who can kind of hang with this vibe and come at it like I think Jesus would. And I think it's, hey, I'm going to build a relationship. I'm going to trust that God's going to do something within this relationship to where I'll be able to speak truth. And I could share 2 or 3 stories from even this last month of where it's been a long time coming, but man, I've had some really great conversations within the last week or 2 that I'm like, I never would have thought that happened. But because I don't think I came in to judge them and tell them they're all wrong or doing this. Like I have, like a lot of relational equity now with some of these people. So yes, I think they should look into it. You should pray about it. And if you have the right person, I think it would be. And here's the thing that I'm trying to think through. If we do this again somewhere locally, how do we show up at another brewery and make it our space for a season before we ever even say we're launching something out of here? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Hey, we have a couple of, we call our community gatherings around the table, our family reunions. Well, what would it look like for these 2 or 3 family reunions just to say that brewery is going to be your brewery? And if you have an event or a party that you want to have, if you, whatever, that's going to be your place that you go to. And all of a sudden for 6 months, 7 months, whatever it is, that's your place. You build a relationship, you're building community within that community. And then it's not so much out of nowhere, you're dropping this idea.
Right.
Hey, we want to do this church thing here. No, oh, you're a known entity now.
Yeah.
So that's something that I'm trying to process through how we would go about that. But that's something that I would love to pass on to somebody else, who might want to do it. So
it also seems like there has to be some probably honest conversations where if, a church or even a new community emerging, is thinking, oh, this will be a great idea. If your goal is to do church the normal way, the traditional way, and just insert it into this, like you were mentioning, it's probably not going to fit. So it would take, it seems like a willingness to say, we're going to reinvent this thing. We're going to hold this loosely, the model loosely, as we're teaching kids next to a wine barrel. There's going to be some give and take here. Even what you mentioned of like checking kids in. I can imagine quite a few churches or church planters would be like, well, no, there's a way you got to do it. And so it seems like there'd be quite a bit of that where it's like, you either got to commit to this or not. Like, this is not something you just add on to a package that you already have.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just, thinking back 6-7 years ago when I started this journey of wanting to plant a church, this brewery idea wasn't even there. There were certain bars here in our town. There was another brewery that was getting ready to launch that I had approached for sure, just to see, but I wasn't looking at it from how I would look at it now, right? Yeah. I mean, I was looking at it from it'd be a cool vibe, a cool space, but now it's more about, okay, how do we bring the gospel to this situation? How do we show up best here for Jesus? And you certainly have to, you can't come in and say, well, here's how we are going to do it.
Yeah.
I think there has to be a partnership and a flexibility and a holding loosely. You know, I mean, it's so cliche to say, what's that old saying? You probably know better than I do. The message never changed, but the methods, you know, do or need to or whatever. And I certainly think that's applicable here for sure. So
yeah, that's good.
And I think you also have to, you know, you can still, I think, I don't want people to hear like you have to change who you are. Like Michelle and I, and part of Reunion's DNA is that we are very much advocates for the people who I would call living in the shadows of our community. People who have trauma, people who have PTSD, people who have anxiety, families who are struggling because they're caring for a kid who might have a certain diagnosis or whatever. That we still do that here. We still have that mentality here. It just so happens it fits. Like the whole no checking in is because we have several kids that are like, they hate the sticker that you put on, you know, like it's a sensory overload for them and they can't handle that sticker thing. And so we quit doing check-in because we had so many kids that was a trigger for them.
Interesting.
And so, you know, but that's part of the vibe for us here is like, well, it actually works here, you know, for us not to do that. And, you know, again, we still get information and all that kind of stuff, parents and all that jazz, but you don't have to change who you are.
Right.
But I do think you have to change maybe your mentality if you've grown up in or been in a traditional church for a while, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Now let's dive in a little bit more on what you just mentioned, because that is some of the DNA unique to you, not just in the setting, but in, you know, who God has wired you guys as a community to be. And one of the phrases that you use quite a bit, and I've seen this all over your website and everything, is that you are a trauma-informed church. And, you know, I spend a lot of time in church world. That's not a phrase you see everywhere. That's just kind of one of those like, oh, that's something, you know, unique to you guys. I don't see a lot of churches saying that. What does it mean to be a trauma-informed church?
Well, if my wife were here, she would give you a much better answer than I would. But really, it means that we understand that people show up carrying some kind of trauma in their past. And I think in the past, we would say, hey, yeah, that's hard, suck it up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, or yeah, you know, I had an abusive family member too, but it doesn't, you know, like, I mean, to where we would almost kind of like dismiss it. And being a trauma-informed church actually means we want to own it, that we all have trauma, that we all have experienced some kind of, you know, hardship, and because of COVID, we most certainly have all experienced the trauma of being isolated. Your kids have been, you know, challenged and changed because of what happened through COVID, et cetera. And so really it just means, I think, creating a culture that welcomes people even when it's hard. You know, if a parent, you know, in particular, moms are probably more on this spectrum than dads, but, you know, a mom, when she shows up to check her kid in and she's been uninvited from a church before, or the church that she used to go to said, we can't handle your kid anymore because he acts out, or he might just be triggered because of loud noises or lights, or some of the other kids have learned that if they poke or push certain buttons with him or her, then they can get a good reaction that they want. And so what a mom wants to hear is, we may not know exactly how your kid's going to respond, but we got it. We got it. We'll handle it, and we're not afraid of it. You're welcome here. And I think that goes for adults too, that you can show up here. You may have had, again, an abusive person in your life, and so you don't trust authority figures. Okay, you don't, you know, I get it. You come at me or one of the other staff members with a certain angle of like distrust. Okay, that's okay. We'll deal with it. We'll work through it, building trust, building relationships. And so again, there's 6 other hours that I would love to give a definition to this. But being trauma informed literally means creating a culture of understanding that we all have trauma, and we shouldn't be afraid of it, and we shouldn't dismiss it. And we need to learn how to live with it and grow in it and help each other heal in it, because I think the church, a lot of times I say, a lot of times we put on the church face on Sunday morning, and then we go home on Monday or Sunday afternoon, and man, we're a wreck. Bring the wreck, just bring it, and let's just acknowledge it. And I think it's more healthy, I think sometimes my family, I don't think my mom or dad will listen to this. My sister may, but my mom and dad, they kind of owned that we were crazy. We were just, we weren't perfect. And I think there's some health in that, of just like saying, yeah, we're a little nuts. And I think honestly, a church needs to do that. We're dysfunctional. We're dysfunctional people. That's why we need Jesus. And so what questions does that raise up in you as I'm saying, like, is that clear? Because I really want the listeners to understand what I'm saying. I feel like I'm a little all over the place with that answer, but.
Well, I think like the way you normally hear this in church, and this is a phrase, I've seen this in numerous churches, is they'll say, no perfect people allowed here. And it's always kind of tongue in cheek, like wink, wink. Hey, if you're perfect, you're not welcome here. Like obviously no one's perfect, but it strikes me as that phrase has a certain level of superficiality to it, where it's, like, hey, bring your stuff. But I think the typical person's wondering, how much could you handle? Like,
right. Sure.
Yeah. Like no one's claiming to be perfect, but like, are you really prepared if I were to be honest with you, if I were to share this thing, or if I were to show you my family, if I were to show you what's going on with my kid? Like, I think that's where most people, they hear a phrase like that. What you seem to be doing is the same idea, in basic idea, but like the other end of the spectrum, where you're almost saying like, do your worst. Like we're trauma informed. What have you got? Like, what's your trauma? What's your PTSD? Like, bring it on in as if it's the most normal thing you could bring. So rather than saying like, hey, if you're perfect, you can't be here, which like no one thinks they're perfect, and that's not, I don't know. I just always thought that was a miss. But what you're saying is like, literally bring your kid that has challenges, bring your relationship that is rocky, bring your family that's got all of this. I'll be honest with you, Mark, I don't hear a lot of churches talk that way, where like we know you've got trauma and we're welcoming that trauma in. And I do think the typical person, probably many of them listening to this episode, have a real skepticism to be vulnerable with a church community, to be vulnerable with a pastor, because they've been burned. They have, taken the chance to say, okay, I'll show you what I'm going through. And then it's cost them friends or community or a position in a church. It's like, oh, well, I shouldn't have shared that with you. So where I hear you saying that, it's almost like, no, we actually mean this. Like, we actually are welcoming this. And I don't know. Maybe someone's like, well, it's, they're saying the same thing. It feels different to me, at least in the verbiage that I'm hearing from you.
Yeah. Well, and I want to be careful, because I think sometimes when we talk about this kind of stuff, we could sound like we're ragging on other churches, and I don't, that's not my heart. But unfortunately, it's where we have some of our examples from.
The hurt in this area.
Yeah. And so like, I'll share just briefly from an own personal experience. My wife I was traveling, and she took our kids to a church, and it's huge, great church in the community. And they said that they have a special needs ministry for kids, and our kids, and we've said this before, like, just because you can't see it doesn't mean that you don't have something going on. And my kids are great, they're amazing, but they do respond in certain ways given certain circumstances, or they're processing certain things differently. And so this church kind of said, hey, we have this, mentality, and again, I wouldn't say our kids have things that you see. They have anxiety. There's anxiety, and that comes out in different ways. Anyways, I'm not going to share the whole story, but our kid got confronted because of some of his actions, and basically we got asked to not come back because because the rules weren't being followed. And I think ultimately, and we don't always nail it, I think ultimately you're right that the church has botched the conversation. We've botched the handling of things, whether you want to, some of the popular ones of the LGBTQ stuff or the race stuff or the political stuff, we've botched it. But even whittling it down to personal people, we I think from a mega, I don't even want to use that word, from a church standpoint, because it happens in all sizes. It happens in all sizes. We have a certain formula, we have a certain way, we have a certain thing that wants to care for the masses. And if you can vibe with that, if you can roll with that, great. But if you can't, I'm not sure if we want you around. Again, we won't ever say that out loud.
Right.
But there are rules, or unspoken rules, or unspoken things, and I think like what Reunion is trying to do is literally just saying we are a community of dysfunctional people who have grown up. I had a great family, but we're broken people. And I think that's part of it, right? We have to share it from the stage. We have to be vulnerable from the stage. We have to say things and own our own crap from the stage, to lead by example, to help people, and we have to be willing to have those conversations. For a season, we had a couple coming, 2 ladies who were seeing each other, and they were coming to Reunion, and quite honestly, it was the first time in my chair as the lead pastor that I was having to process, how do we navigate this conversation? We began to, say, hey, one of them wanted to serve in our children's ministry. Okay, let's figure that out. But I was determined to have to build a relationship with them so that we could talk whatever we wanted to or needed to talk about in the future from a relational standpoint, as opposed to a rule standpoint. And so I think that's ultimately what we're saying is we want the relationship, even if it's crappy or if it's filled with baggage or, we don't understand each other, and it's easy to say that. I mean, I think that's the other problem, is that we don't have time to slow down to do relational stuff.
Yeah.
And the hard work. And that's hard. That's really hard. So there's many things that I would love to say that I know I'm forgetting to say, but I think I'm just kind of trying to share from the heart what I think we're trying to say. Again, not even coming close to nailing it or being perfect at it. I think we're learning, and that's what it is. Being trauma informed means you're learning, because there's new trauma for people each and every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's just where we have to lean into Jesus. So.
Now, you and I have talked about the mechanisms of the American evangelical church, and you and I each have different phrases for it. I call it the machine of the church. What's your phrase for it?
You got to feed the beast.
You got to feed the beast. That's right. So you talk about feeding the beast. I talk about keeping the machine running. Both are the same idea of, if you do certain things, the system works well. If you don't do those certain things, well, I didn't do those things well, which is why my experience played out the way it did. But then I also realized I don't want to spend my life feeding that machine. And you have, come to similar conclusions. What have you learned, not only just in planting a church, but in planting a church in a brewery? What has this taught you about the beast, about the machine of the evangelical church?
That's a loaded question. It's a really loaded question. Well, I have learned that God uses and will continue to use, quote unquote, the machine. And we have benefited from large churches and have had some really amazing partners in those large churches. And I mean, we're here today because we had some amazing partners during COVID. And I had buddies here around that had to shut their churches down because they didn't. And so there certainly are some good, there's great things, but what I have come to learn or land on is that I personally enjoy not having a mortgage to try and pay off or to pay down. And I think that's been a huge blessing or learning. And, you know, our situation is really unique. I don't know if it'll always be like this for people who try to do the brewery thing, you know, but our situation is really unique, and it's been a blessing to not have to worry about the $30,000 a month rent or down or mortgage payment that you have when it comes to having some of those things. You know, you're more flexible, you have more autonomy to be able to say, hey, you know, I mean, literally during Oktoberfest, we said, hey, we're going to meet in the park this week and have a family day. And we had a couple of songs that we sang, and I had a brief little 5-10 minute devotional, but we ate and had coffee and spent time developing our relationships. And so, but in the machine or in the beast, boy, you gotta do the deal. You gotta have the services and the kids and everything dialed in and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, it allows us to have more flexibility and more freedom to do different things. And so, like, we have about 3 to 5 times a year these weekends where we just don't do church, normal church service and whatnot. We have a camping weekend. And so we say, hey, we'd love for you to come be part of our camping weekend, but we're not going to have church this weekend, you know, and we of course let people know about it. During the summer, we have a beach day, and, you know, so on and so forth. And so it's really a unique way to build community, and also just a freshness again, where I'm like, and I get stuck in my traditional ways. My wife is a little bit more what I call my personal prophet, or my personal, people listening to this might say, oh, this guy's really into the weird stuff. I'm just saying she sees things way sooner than I do. And
just blame it on the wine, Mark. Just blame it on the wine.
That's what I'll blame. I'll blame it on the juggernaut. Really, honestly, she has suggested things that probably in the past where I would have said, or she would say, you did say, I don't think so. But where she has said we should do, and we've done it. And I've been nervous about it, but we did it. And it was like massively successful. And I would say it fits more into our culture. And I would encourage guys, if you need to listen more to your wife. I mean, that's probably another thing that it has allowed me to do is you know, because church used to be my thing and hers was like the home and caring and doing all that stuff. But now we're in it together way more than we ever were. And, you know, there's a learning process that comes with that. But I have learned to love that more than be frustrated by it. Because, you know, we're different people, and she's black and white and I live a lot in the gray, and that always tends to be a little tricky sometimes. But yeah. Probably not even close to the answer or close to your question, what have I learned or what, but I love it. I love not having to, you know, there's still that tension, back to the beginning of the question. There's still the tension of like, man, we still do have bills to pay. We still do want to grow, but this is just a different path, different way of growing, and measurables. What is it that we are actually measuring? Yeah, of course we want to know how many people are coming, but I can't remember the last time I asked how many people were coming. But I do know how many, I do want to know how many people are in our family reunions. I do want to know how many people are in our discipling groups. And I do want to know how many people we're meeting with during the week, you know, so it just changes my perspective.
Yeah, that's great. All right, I'm going to switch gears on us. Let's talk wine for a second. I love asking our guests this question. If I were to ask you to think about just a highlight moment you drinking wine, so could be an incredible bottle, an incredible glass, could have been the company you're with, the environment. If you think about like, man, that wine was as good as it can get, that was so amazing. What's a memory that comes to your mind? Can you describe it for us?
Yeah, I referenced it earlier, but I can't remember how far into COVID it was, but I think we all, in the states that were more locked down than not, you kind of had your circle of trust of people. And at our family reunion, we had about 10 families that were like, those were our people, and our kids were hanging out, and it was a beautiful season. Well, we decided to go rent a house in Paso Robles and just kind of get out of the city for a season. And the first winery that we went to, and this was really like doing group stuff outside of like lockdown, was, it was just kind of weird. It felt weird when you started doing it again. It was like, should we do this? Can we do, like, it was just because California just was freaky. But we went to this place called Austin Hope Winery, and the vibe was great. The wine was great. The laughter was great. The girls were over at their table, and we could hear them laughing, and us guys were over at our table hanging out, doing our thing, and it was great wine. They had this one called, the grape was Mordova. I can't remember the actual bottle name, but they had this Mordova, and I remember taking a sip of that, and I was like, dude, this is incredible glass of wine. And again, sun was setting in the background, hills in the back. I mean, it was just like
birds chirping.
Yeah, it was incredible. So it was a great. That's probably one of my favorite glasses right there.
That's great. All right, let's close with some questions that I like to ask each guest, and we get to compare your answers. What is something you used to believe that it turned out later you were wrong about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I go back to one of my earlier stories that I shared, and that was just in my pride. And I wouldn't have ever said this out loud back in the day, because I don't know if I would have been able to internalize it the right way or to it come out the right way. But like, I used to probably live in a world where I thought I kind of had a special sauce. And man, when you go through traumatic events and hard things and difficult things, and really, I truly believe that one of the reasons why we had to go through it, so that I could just say it was all God, not me, and give him the honor and the glory of just like, I mean, I'm only sitting here talking to you about my church that meets in a brewery because of him. Like, yeah. And I believe that. I mean, I believe that we went through some really, really crazy hard seasons, and some seasons that I just was like, you thought you were special, or, you thought you had a good plan, and that thing has been up in smoke for, a year now. And really all I had to go off of was in my basement. And I hear God saying, brought you here to start a movement for the lost and the fatherless. Keep going. I got this. And like, when you have nothing else to hold on to, you're holding on to those words for dear life. And I really didn't know what that meant, except for just each day. And so my belief would be that I used to have would be like, I brought something to the table. My belief is that it's all him. If he wants it to go, it's going to be all him. And I need to probably listen to that again when you put the podcast out there to remind myself.
You can scrub to that part.
Yeah. So
what do you see as the main issues facing Christianity in America today?
I think out of all our conversation, I'm glad I get to re-answer this, because I think in the previous one I did say, I think, our conversations around, some of the typical answers, the LGBTQ and race and politics, I think those are certainly big issues. And as we referenced earlier, probably have messed them up. I'm complicit in that. I'm sure I've jacked that up too. But I think ultimately it comes to discipling people. And I know that word has a lot of baggage, and it has a lot of meaning. Probably for every single person listening, they have a different meaning of what that looks like or what that means. And yet I believe that if the American church really wanted to tackle getting serious about having their people follow Jesus, and then have other people follow Jesus like they're following Jesus, and so on and so forth, it would change everything. And ultimately, I feel like we have labeled discipleship as far as like, hey, well, you're attending 2 out of the 4 weekends. You're attending a small group, and gosh, you're really knocking it out of the park because you're tithing or giving. And man, you're Superman if you're volunteering on top of all that other stuff. You're a disciple now. And ultimately, those are marks of a disciple. But I mean, discipling is you leading someone else to follow Jesus as you're following him. And then they start doing that with someone else, and so on and so forth. And I believe if we would get serious about that, it's messy, it's hard, and it's wonky. But I think that's the biggest issue, quite honestly, because you could then walk into those conversations of some of those other bigger topics if you're listening to the Spirit, if you're reading the Word and you're obeying what it's saying to do. I mean, instead of listening to your own opinions, and I think that'll change everything if we could get serious about that.
Love it. What is something that's blowing your mind right now?
2 things, maybe 3, but 2. One is the very surfacey thing is the AI stuff. I mean, to me, that stuff's crazy. It's bananas. I don't know. To me, it's fascinating. I've had a conversation with somebody who, they believe it's kind of like a little bit of the devil, and like it's going to diminish and reduce and keep people from growing in their faith. And that it may be true because you can like type in your, what should I believe about or whatever. But there's still some crazy, amazing things. Like, I mean, we had power outages here, and somebody gave me a generator, and I hadn't tried to start it in years. And I was like, hey, I need you to be a small engine specialist. And my generator's not working. What do you think the problem is? And within 10 minutes, I had it running. And
really,
literally, I had like my own personal mechanic through the chat GPT. So to me, that was just, that's just kind of mind blowing. And then the other one that's probably more serious is, man, we've shared a little bit of our family and some of the blessings and the struggles, but I have a 19-year-old right now who is maturing, and some of the things that he's saying and learning and deciding, I'm just like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I'm so proud of him. I'm so like, I just, as a dad, I'm just like bursting with pride over some of the things that, and it's not like revolutionary stuff. But it is, and so that's blowing my mind, just being a dad and parenting a kid for 19 years and seeing the arc of, all the things that go with that to today, where I'm like, okay, man, there's something going on here that's pretty awesome. So
yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
What's a problem you're trying to solve?
I said it earlier of like, how do we serve our community? How do we serve the people that were the business owners and the employees of the alley where the brewery and the winery and the craft house and the pizza joint are? That's a problem or a good challenge. I don't know if it's a problem. It's more of a challenge of like, how do we not just feel like we're inserting ourselves into this conversation, in a forced way, but instead, how are we grafting? How does God want to graft us into that? And then the other one is the more vulnerable side of like, we're worn out. My wife and I, we're just beat down, tired. And I think I was talking with a buddy of mine who's got a huge church and I won't say the city because you could probably guess like out of 3 guys who it would be. But I have a buddy who he's exhausted too, and it's a huge church, and but the amount of content a pastor has to produce, amount of leadership decisions a guy has to make, whether you have a church of 150 in a brewery or 6,000 in a city. I mean, like it's and also be like a pastor and a sage advisor. I mean, it's unrealistic. It's unrealistic. And oh yeah, by the way, you do have bills to pay. Oh yeah, by the way, you do have to go out and raise funds. Oh yeah, by the way, you do have to navigate, all kinds of stuff. And it's just exhausting. And so how do you have a healthy rhythm? How do you have a healthy life? And I don't have the answer for that right now, because our family dynamics and the church dynamics and just life. And so that's a real sticky one for me right now. And I don't have a great answer. And I know people will say, well, you should take a Sabbath and you need to take a sabbatical, or you need a, yes. And if it were that easy, yes. But it's just not as simple as that. And so that's a problem or a challenge I'm trying to wrestle down.
Yeah. What's something you're excited about right now?
Again, my son stuff, that's something that was exciting or is exciting. I'm excited about the potential that our discipling groups are having. We have kind of like the second generation coming out of, like, the staff have kind of all done what we call our grow groups, and it's disciple making movement practices that, around the world people are using what's called DBS or DMM stuff. It's a very simple form of discipleship, but we have like the second generation is now going out and finding their people that they feel like God's leading them to. And I mean, dude, again, back to the feed the beast, like you feel the pressure to multiply and get that done and to get out there. But like, we've really just tried to, as best we can, not feel that pressure. And it's been we're going on like 2.5 years. And like most people would say, well, you suck at discipling, I guess, because
do it better.
Because how many generations do you have of disciple? But we have like a second generation that's getting ready to start, and to me, man, that's awesome. I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about. Again, I don't want to betray confidence. I know I talk a lot, and you're like, dude, wrap it up. It's going on a minute 10. But I've had some really cool conversations with some of the people where we're doing our church within the last week, 2 weeks, and like big God conversations. And they're wrestling some of their faith down, and they're trying to figure it out. And to me, that's, again, fruit of being in it for the long haul and sticking it out in a weird, funky place called a brewery to do church in. But
super cool.
It's exciting.
All right. Is there anything else that you want to add that I may not have asked you about, but we cannot wrap this episode up if you don't get it in?
I think 2 things. One is I would love to just challenge people to think differently. I mean, yeah, we stumbled into this, but I think there's something to this new page in church planning or church in a brewery. And if you want to talk to me about it, I won't have all the answers, and I'm not going to pretend to be the expert. I may be a step in front of you or whatever, but I would love to have the conversation if that would be helpful for whoever that is. If they feel led to even just have a conversation or talk through that. And then I would love to just, if I don't know what your audience is, Jeremy, if it's all over the place, but if you have church leaders to really wrestle down the trauma piece and the people, there's thousands of people in our cities living in the shadows that have felt uninvited, who have felt rejected by the church, or who have felt like they can't, like church doesn't get them. And what does that mean for us to really try to go after that crew of people instead of just saying, well, if they don't like it, sucks to be them. And I know we wouldn't say that out loud, but I think sometimes we have that vibe. And I just would challenge us and challenge myself, because my wife challenges me a lot to, like, hey, we got to think about these people who are going through traumatic things by themselves. And there's thousands of them in every city, wherever someone's listening to. And so those are a couple of things that come to mind. And maybe people who have been burned by the church, hurt by the church, just know we're just trying to figure it out ourselves. And the people who I think society have put on pedestals called pastors really are just human too. And they may have botched something royally, and I'm sorry for that. I really am. Because I'm sure I've botched it, but give Jesus a chance. He won't disappoint you, even though us humans will. So that's what I'd say.
It's a good word, Mark. If someone's digging this and they're like, I like this guy, I want to know more, I want to follow up, how can people reach you online?
Yeah, I mean, you can follow or find me on Instagram. Give this caveat. It's not because I think I'm awesome. It was the only handle left that I could have my name in. But you can find me on Instagram. I am Mark McKinney. It's so horrible. You can find me there, or you can email me, mark@reunion.tv. And we can go from there.
Well, Mark, I have seriously loved getting to know you more. I'm grateful that you are charting a new way forward, that you are showing a lot of people, hey, it doesn't have to only be this way. And I think for a lot of people who obviously resonate with this podcast, they're probably going to resonate with this model of church of, hey, this is pretty cool. And so thanks for being a trendsetter. Thanks for being willing to stumble your way through something that there is no playbook for. And for being willing to talk to me not once but twice about it, and to give me your time to do that. Hey, it means the world, and I'm super grateful for you.
Yeah, man, my joy, my honor, and certainly by God's grace, we're doing this.
That's awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching or listening. We will catch you on the next episode of Cabernet and Pray.